afraid of the dark.
This story took place in 1977 in the state of Ottawa. In the bustling and lively town, hidden behind the noise of urban hustle and bustle, behind the facades of then modern buildings, stood an old wooden two-story house with boarded-up shutters and doors. The structure had long been forgotten, and it didn't bother anyone, nestled in a secluded courtyard, surrounded by two walls of houses and a fence. Occasionally, local drunks would wander into the corner to relieve themselves, and only the older folks feared this place, knowing about an unpleasant incident when 4 people died from heart failure during renovations in the house, causing the remaining workers to refuse to work there and board up the shutters with planks, just to prevent others from venturing inside, and so it remained forgotten. Returning from other towns for the summer holidays, a cheerful group gathered friends and school, 4 guys and 3 girls. Spirited Sophie was the life of the party, playing guitar, going hiking, fearing nothing, and always striving to be the first. One day, returning from a dance, the group passed by the area where the wooden house was located. The young people needed to relieve themselves, so they went around the corner. Returning to their waiting friends, they recounted how they had completely forgotten about the boarded-up house. Discussions began about why it was boarded up, what might be inside, and whether they could explore it. Then one of the boys asked, "Who's got the guts to spend the whole night in this house?" To which spirited Sophie replied, "What's so scary about it? All grown-ups know that ghosts are just kids' fantasies, and the only thing to fear in this house is rats, and anyway, let's try to sneak in there tomorrow." The cheerful group readily agreed, and everyone went home. The next day, armed with flashlights, the young people gathered in the alley and began searching for a way to get inside. One of the boys discovered that the cellar door was loosely closed. With a little effort, they pried off the boards and swung open the doors. A moss-covered staircase led downwards, emitting a damp and chilly breeze from the darkened opening. "Just like in a pharaoh's tomb," exclaimed Sophie joyfully and went in first. Illuminating the damp floor and walls with a yellow beam of light, the group found a staircase leading upstairs. Ascending, they found themselves on the ground floor of the forgotten house. Sunlight barely penetrated through the dried cracks in the boarded-up shutters, illuminating the abandoned items: paintbrushes, buckets with dried solutions, rolls of old wallpaper flattened at the edges, lying on the table, old furniture covered with newspapers. "Look at this. Newspapers from '58, exclaimed one of the boys. "Let's go upstairs," called Sophie from the staircase to everyone, and the group eagerly followed her up the creaky, rotting staircase. Upstairs there were 6 rooms, all still furnished to some extent, and one had a moldy sofa. While the group rummaged through the drawers of the wardrobe, one of the boys, and then everyone suddenly heard footsteps on the ground floor, like a child running. "Someone must have followed us here," said Sophie cheerfully. The young people began to feel uneasy when suddenly there was a deafening crash from the attic. "Let's get out of here," one of the boys whispered. But Sophie was determined. "Why are you all such cowards? Do you want me to prove that I have the guts to spend the night here alone?" Nervously looking around, the group was already descending to the basement and towards the exit when suddenly something heavy rolled directly above their heads and crashed into the wall. The young people rushed out onto the street. The sun was shining brightly, hurting their eyes from the abrupt transition from darkness to light. Looking back, they all realized that Sophie was missing. "Where is she?" one of the boys asked. "Sophie." "Stop joking," shouted the girls into the darkness. Footsteps were heard from the darkness, and a girl emerged from the basement, squinting happily, carrying a beautiful brooch with shimmering stones. "Look what I found," Sophie asked proudly. "When you hurried out onto the street, my sweater got caught on the door of one of the closets, and it opened. There on the old rags, it was hanging. Isn't it beautiful?" "Are you really going to spend the night in this house?" one of her friends asked, sounding concerned. "I told you I have enough courage, but all of you are superstitious cowards. There's nothing in this house except rats and old rags, so I'll go there tonight." "Well then, we'll wait for you outside." In the evening, a group of friends gathered near an abandoned house. Sophie, with a backpack on her back, was determined. The guys brought a whole bench from somewhere and began to settle in to wait. "If anything happens, just shout." "Okay," one of the guys said. "What do you mean?" "If anything," Sophie replied confidently. "Everything will be fine. I'll be back with you at 6 in the morning." Cheerful and well-rested with these words, Sophie disappeared into the darkness of the basement. The guys sat waiting on the bench. The nights were hot, the conversation flowed. The guys even brought wine, so the wait wasn't as boring as it could have been. Around 3 in the morning, their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a loud crash, as if a wardrobe had fallen in the house. But there was no scream from Sophie. "Maybe she's chasing away some rats," joked one of the girls, and the conversation continued. Dawn was breaking. Only 2 hours left. The group was getting tired, and between conversations there were long pauses of silence as they strained to hear any sound from the house. Finally, it was 6 a.m., 6:10, 6:15. "Maybe she's sleeping," someone suggested. "Let's go in ourselves," one of the girls suggested nervously. "What if?" Huddled closer together, they entered the house. The silence inside was so profound that it seemed you could hear the flutter of a butterfly. As they climbed from the basement to the ground floor, the group didn't notice anything at first. It was only when one of the boys shone a light into the corner that they saw Sophie curled up, disheveled, trembling and tear-stained. Her clothes were torn, blood was visible, and her face was covered in it. When the group approached her, she couldn't even straighten up. Her body was trembling violently. The group immediately called the police and an ambulance. After these events, Sophie spent a year in a mental hospital. After her discharge, she didn't talk to anyone, only writing short answers on pieces of paper. What happened to her in that house remains unknown to the group of friends. They only know that doctors found about 50 human bite marks on Sophie's body, numerous scratches, and 2 missing teeth. After being discharged from the hospital, Sophie lived for 2 months before taking her own life. What could have happened in the house where there was not a single human, nor any living soul? The group of friends still doesn't know. When Sophie was brought out onto the street, the guys ran to call the police and the ambulance. The police searched the entire house and found no one, not even rats. No one could have escaped unnoticed. There was only one exit, and the other windows and gaps remained boarded up and untouched. This story was told by a very respectable and serious 54-year-old man, who was one of the participants in these strange events.